Let me now ask you a question. Is the United Nations facing a crisis of credibility? Has it become a bureaucratic behemoth that bends to the biggest sponsors? I ask this because the UN is being held hostage by a few countries who are misusing their disproportionate powers to suit their own political interests, to influence the body's decision-making and to provide a cover to their allies. So is it finally time that we reform the United Nations and make it deliver on its goals? Well, it certainly seems so. And guess who's leading the call to get this done? India. Speaking at the UN on Wednesday, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar called for sweeping reform at the UN. Reform that will make the body functional yet again. Reform that will make the body credible again. We'll get there in a bit. First, some context. Jaishankar made this speech during a session on counter-terrorism at the United Nations Security Council, a session that is also being attended by Pakistan. Yes, a terror state is part of a session on counter-terrorism. And if you think that's ironic, then you must look at what it is doing at the session. On Tuesday, Pakistan's foreign minister and part-time enunciation coach, Bilawal Bhutto, raked up the Kashmir issue yet again during his speech at the session. We're hardly surprised. How can Pakistan attend a UNSC session and not talk about its favorite obsession? So India decided to counter Pakistan with some facts. In a stinging speech, Jaishankar said that a country which provided refuge to Osama Bin Laden, a country which launched a terror attack on the Indian Parliament, has no right or credentials to sermonize UN member nations. Listen to this.
Excellencies, before I call on the next speaker, allow me to say a few words in my national capacity. We are obviously focused today on the urgency of reforming multilateralism. We will naturally have our particular views, but there is an ongoing convergence, at least, that this cannot be delayed any further. The credibility of the UN depends on its effective response to the key challenges of our times, be it pandemics, climate change, conflicts, or terrorism. While we search for the best solutions, what our discourse must never accept is the normalization of such threats. The question of justifying what the world regards as unacceptable should not even arise. That certainly applies to state sponsorship of cross-border terrorism. Nor can hosting Osama bin Laden and attacking a neighboring parliament serve as credentials to sermonize before this council.
Jaishankar's message was simple. You can't be sponsoring terror on one end and talking about human rights on the other. You can't be hosting dreaded terrorists and portray yourself as a victim of their doing. We hope Islamabad is able to comprehend this message. Next, Jaishankar took aim at China, a country that holds the veto power at the UN and uses it to shield Pakistan for its role in breeding terror. In a veiled reference, he said, and I quote, "On the challenge of terrorism, even as the world is coming together with a more collective response, multilateral platforms are being misused to justify and protect perpetrators." What exactly was he referring to? China's repeated holds and blocks on proposals to blacklist terrorists, especially those based on Pakistani soil. Case in point, Masood Azhar, the chief of Jaish-e-Mohammed. Every time India brings a resolution or proposal to blacklist this man, China comes to Pakistan's rescue. It places a technical hold on the proposal. I can recall at least 4 instances when it has done so. Once in 2016, then in 2017, and once more in 2019. This only highlights the prevailing inequities at the UN, where one country with a veto power can take a decision which affects millions. Jaishankar used this as the pretext of his argument when he called for reform during his speech. He said the world needs to have an honest conversation on the effectiveness of multilateral institutions. He said that all members of such institutions should have a credible role in the decision-making process. They can't just function at the whim of a few global powers. Listen to this.
We not only need to increase stakeholdership, but also enhance the effectiveness and credibility of multilateralism in the eyes of the international community and in the eyes of global public opinion. That is the purpose of NOBS. Excellencies, if this is to happen, member states from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and small island developing states should have credible and continuing representation in the Security Council. Decisions about the future can no longer be taken without their participation.
Now here's the thing. 5 countries enjoy disproportionate power at the UN: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia. They all have the power of the veto, a power which each one of them has misused. Britain and France misused the veto against Egypt during the Suez Crisis. Russia uses the veto against all resolutions condemning Syria. Any resolution against Israel is consistently vetoed by the US. And China uses the veto to block India's bid to ban Pakistani terrorists. My point is simple. It's been 7 decades since the Second World War, and only the so-called victors of the war possess the power of veto along with China. How is this even fair? Why can't countries like Japan, South Africa, and India have the right to veto? Let me now give you a debrief on India's contribution at the UN. More than 200,000 Indians have served in 49 of the 71 UN peacekeeping missions since 1948. 160 Indians have lost their lives serving under the UN flag. India is the 4th highest troop contributing country at the UN. A total 6,700 Indian troops are deployed for UN peacekeeping missions. And in 2007, India became the first country to deploy an all-women contingent to a UN peacekeeping mission. So I ask again, how long can India and the rest of the UN members be expected to follow the decision of the P5 nations? The bottom line is this: if the United Nations wants to stay relevant, if it wants to be the collective voice of the world, then it must ensure equitable representation of all member states. It must increase stakeholdership in its decision-making process. 5 nations, just 5 nations, cannot be taking all the calls. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.